Okay, now I'm going to be like 17 minutes. Okay, so here's the thing about this topic. Who's in the lab that's working on T? Are any of you actually working on T? Like, are any of you the ones that have been tasked to find the definition? Oh, all together you've done it. Oh, okay, awesome. Okay, here's my opinion, not having looked at the T file. Pretty much everything is going to be effectually topical. I mean, there's no way to increase development or exploration without, like, first doing something to accomplish that. Does that make sense? And so this, to me, falls into the category of what I would label remove a barrier act, where currently there is some barrier or legal instrument that is limiting our ability to explore or develop space. Are you with me? And that you remove that, and by removing it, you are increasing space exploration or development. Well, I mean, there are people who would say that that affects T, but what other way do you increase space exploration or development, right? It's sort of the answer back to that. So anyway, no, I don't think it's affects T. I think it is the only T. Or so we will say when we write this out. It's going to be super awesome. Okay, negative ideas about the Outer Space Treaty. Space bill, current outer space, like I said, in the absence of the PDWT, current outer space law would allow for lots of different weapons that were not anticipated in 1967. So there are loopholes that exist, and that would be bad. That would cause space mill. Does that make sense? Nod your head if you're listening. Nod your head if that makes sense. Okay. Second negative idea. Cooperation Act. I'm not really sure that, well, I think that one way to read the Outer Space Treaty is if the act cooperates with, say, India or China, that is not the U.S. because the Article 8 says that in part that the state party to the treaty, which would be like the U.S., whose registry and objects is launched into outer space, is carried, shall return jurisdiction and the control over such objects. All this means is, if we launch something on a Russian rocket, it's the Russians. I think. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so I think you could use that potentially to make a T argument, that cooperation acts are not the U.S. increasing its space exploration and development because it's not its stuff. I also think that you could just say, like, U.S. hedge good, you've just crushed U.S. hegemony by taking away our jurisdiction. Okay, mining acts, I'm actually going to return to this. Mining acts, I think, have some important legal implications internationally because mining in space is really underdeveloped. So I'm going to return to that. Okay, rescue agreement. So I'm moving now from the Outer Space Treaty to the second of the 5 treaties. And so this second treaty is the rescue agreement. This says that we have to be nice if there's an astronaut, a cosmonaut, a taconaut, or the Yuan are in trouble. That is U.S., Russian, and Chinese. Apparently the Chinese have 2 words for astronauts. I don't really know why. Okay. That's literally all this agreement says. I got nothing. Like, I got nothing. Like, I don't think we can be nicer. I don't think that you want to say on the negative, haha, leave them up there. If the ISS is spiraling out of control, leave them. Yes? No. I can't go back. I can only move forward. Questions about that? Okay, you come up with something over the course of the year, you send me an email, because seriously, I got nothing. All right, liability agreement. This is the 3rd treaty. This attempts to clarify some of the problems with the Outer Space Treaty because it expands the principle of liability for damage caused by space objects introduced in the Outer Space Treaty. First off, what does the word liability mean? Responsibility. Yeah, like responsibility for something. So, my earlier example where we gave you all the ability to check yourselves into the dorm, Remember that example? And how excited you were about that prospect? Okay. The reason why we do not do that is that the University of North Texas would assume super lots of liability, which means that when you wandered off and decided to walk across 35 in the middle of the night, I-35, that's the major highway that runs by the university. Are you with me? This would be lots of liability because when you decided to be Frogger and cross I-35, we would probably have to pay when you were, maimed. Okay. There are two things about this liability agreement. So space objects, by the way, are just like anything in space. And so the liability agreement was attempting to clarify that if a space object causes damage to the surface of the Earth or an aircraft in flight, that you could figure out who was going to have to pay for that. And then the second thing is whether or not the space object causes damage to someplace other than the surface of the Earth. So if you launched a satellite and it spiraled out of control and hit the moon and put the moon out of orbit and then it affected the oceans and stuff, that'd be doubly bad because you would be liable for what you did to the Earth by jacking with the ocean tides. Do y'all know the moon controls the tides?
Yeah.
Okay. And you would be liable because you did damage to the moon. Okay? Does that make sense under the liability agreement? This has actually only come into play one time. In the mid-1980s, apparently, I was alive then. In the mid-1980s, there was a Russian satellite that was nuke-powered, so it had gooey radioactive stuff in it, fell from the sky into Canada, and it didn't totally burn up in the atmosphere, so pieces of it, including radioactive stuff, spewed all over the Northern Territory of Canada. What do you think Canada thought about this? They were kind of bitter and hostile, and so they actually invoked this liability agreement, and they were like, hey, we're going to come and get you. There's a claims commission that sorts these things out. That Russian-Canada thing never got to the claims commission, but this liability agreement sets that up, and the claims commission has people from the two disputing countries and then a neutral third party, and they then come up with the solution. My favorite part of the liability agreement wording on this claim commission thing is it says that, that compensation be determined according to the international law and principles of justice and equity. I have no idea what that means, and I don't think anybody else actually would if they came to the Liability Commission. So anyway, but that's the kind of point of the liability agreement. All right, app ideas. I've read some stuff that says that this question of liability has limited U.S. space development because the U.S. government isn't sure if it allows a lot of space development to happen, whether they're going to be responsible for it or the companies are going to be responsible for it. So I think an interesting app would clarify the liability stuff to encourage space exploration. I think you could also set up a permanent commission, have the U.S. advocate for a permanent commission, again, to sort of establish a framework for dealing with these issues. And then you could also change U.S. laws to change liability standards. Again, just like with the other agreements we've talked about, this liability agreement allows for the U.S. to set liability standards on U.S. companies. And so I think an app could be to change those liability standards domestically. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Registration agreement. Oh yeah, the neg. Liability decreases development. Registration agreement. So the registration agreement basically clarifies the Outer Space Treaty. Outer Space Treaty says, United States, if you have a company that wants to launch, you gotta write that down and send it over to the UN so that they know. And so the U.S. then is the one that figures out who gets to launch, and they do that by creating a rigorous licensing procedure. You can't go rogue and like set up a launch pad in your backyard and be like, I will make me a rocket. I'm going to launch me a satellite. Okay, you can't do that. If you do, like, the people in the black helicopters are coming to get you, okay? Because you're doing it without the license. Okay, they're so serious about the license that they actually have, like, the procedures laid out. And this, like, kind of blew my mind. If you want to build, like, a launch site, you've got to have a pre-application consultation, a review, a safety review, an environmental review, and then you've got to get, like, monitored. If you want to launch something, you got to, like, apply, review. Then you got to figure out how you're going to pay when something bad happens, environmental review, and then compliance monitoring. So this all falls under the FAA, by the way. So the same people that control the air traffic controllers that fall asleep at night and cause planes to, like, collide with each other, they're in charge of the satellites.
Oh, Joe.
So it's good times. Okay, this, I know that, like, I'm cutting into, like, your canis or whatever, but this also blew my mind. Okay, so this is as near as I can tell, this is a London-based company that tracks and then puts on the internet when stuff is going to get launched and where it's going to get launched from. So apparently in Virginia there's something called the Wallops Island, I don't know. But anyway, on June 28th, a few days, they're going to launch a military reconnaissance satellite. Now, even more mind-boggling, I don't know how Microcom figures this out, but in 2018 we're going to be launching a solar probe. Apparently on the 30th of July. So, I mean, I do think that this could be useful to you in terms of debate because it does help you to know kind of the wide variety of programs and who's doing it. So, like, you can see that China, they're launching some oceanography satellite. Obviously, that's probably like Death Star. The Chinese, insert China, evil, earlier. Then you can also see that, like, Kazakhstan is, like, it's a happening place for the launching of stuff in the Cosmodrome. So anyway, all of this is, I think, important for debate because it could allow you to see what some of the other actors are, and that, like, sometimes we apparently don't tell people where we are launching from. That's sketchy. Okay, the clarification, I think, of the registration process would be an ask. If the plan, I know. Here, I've just revolutionized debate. Are you ready? Okay, on the negative, you should run registration spec and ask the ask if they can specify where they've registered. It's better than no spec. Yeah, thank you. Amen. All right, then, the Moon Treaty. The Moon Treaty was signed at some point, late 70s. And the most important thing that the Moon Treaty did was to close the loophole for private entities, and it bars them from laying a claim to the moon or other celestial bodies and extends that prohibition to resources as well. All that means is that the Moon Treaty said, Outer Space Treaty, you missed this thing, right? Remember how I said that private companies could lay sovereign claims to stuff, right? So if the planting of the American flag had been the planting of the Lockheed Martin flag, that would have been okay, according to the Outer Space Treaty. Lockheed Martin is a company. That example did not make sense if you did not know that Lockheed Martin was a company. So the Moon Treaty closes that loophole and says, look, private companies cannot lay sovereign claims to stuff and can't lay claim to resources as well. It also creates a body to monitor the distribution of resources extracted from the moon. This is important to any moon mining apps, obviously, is that there's this body that's supposed to monitor it. Now, the other thing that's super important is that the U.S. has not ratified the Moon Treaty. Neither have the Russians, and neither have the Chinese. So in that whole, like, where my two anarchists at? Okay, so the anarchists are loving this because it means that the moon is basically, you know, the wild, wild west. because there is not a clear international agreement about extracting resources and setting stuff up. The reason why we have not signed on to it, in part, according to critics at least, is